Welcome to Veterans News and Special Reports Podcast. Thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoy what we're going to show you. Learn to fight the VA here the right way for your benefits. Learn the right way to file your claim. Professor Ballou studied at the University of South Vietnam School of Warfare. Become a professor of surviving the VA. You can do this. This podcast will show you the most corrupt governmental department in the United States of America. Veterans Bureau, 1921 to 1930, Episode 7E1.
Veterans News and Special Reports Podcast on YouTube. Broadcasting from our palatial studios in beautiful downtown Spring Hill, Florida. Next door to the Heinekenau Bottling Company, makers of Heine wines in 4 flavors: White Russian, Grape, Peach, and my favorite, Raspberry. Grown in rolling hills of southern Bunghai, China. You may contact us through our email address, ballou1947@aol.com, for PDF files or tell us your story about your battle for benefits or prove me wrong.
Here we give no holes barred reports at Veterans News and Special Reports Podcast. This is WW1 and we're on the air with Professor Richard S. Ballou, PhD in Surviving the VA. This podcast series is episode 7E1. This episode 7E has many names of the VA. Why did they change the name? Because of corruption. The most corrupt governmental department of the United States of America. They had to change the name 3 times just to make American taxpayers not know what they were doing. Since the dawn of time, history has been written in books. 1938, Adolf Hitler tried to burn the books to erase Germany's history. Today, a $5 mouse can erase Adolf Hitler's existence. Now see the history of the VA in its true form. Did you know the whole truth about the veterans and their rightful benefits? American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. The VA did not start until 1921, as today the government lies about it. Let's look at some true history. It started in 1883, after the Revolutionary War. The newly formed United States of America had 25,000 estimated combat deaths, 23 other deaths. The total was 48,000 deaths because of this war. America had 35,000 wounded and maimed veterans survive after the war. They were severely injured and had lost arms, legs in battle to make this so-called great nation. America was required by law to take care of these injured veterans. To do so, they had to charge taxes from the citizens to take care of their injured veterans at $300 a month, and was totally disabled and service-connected. The calm before the storm, Revolutionary War brought forth a new nation, a new republic, under God, as it began to tear itself apart. In our real history, our veterans have been mistreated throughout the 250 years of our existence. They have been overlooked, sometimes treated with malpractice by our government. This is a brief history of one such scandal where politicians use blackmail to get their agenda across or keep other people from manipulating our government. Also mistreating our veterans. The Storm of 1791. Exhibit VA History 1. America's first sex scandal and blackmail. Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, had a 3-year affair with Miss Reynolds while paying her husband James Reynolds blackmail money to maintain secrecy. Hamilton was forced to admit the affair after James Reynolds threatened to manipulate him in Reynolds' own scheme involving speculation on unpaid back wages intended to Revolutionary War veterans. James Reynolds received a job at the Treasury Department stealing money from disabled veterans. World governments used blackmail to get votes their way and to control taxpayers' money at a whim. This has been going on for centuries. Today, 250 years later, we now are able to make videos and modify videos for blackmail. Veterans News and Special Reports Podcast. The whole truth about the Veterans Bureau system to deny American veterans their rightful benefits. Now a word from Professor Richard S. Ballou, Ph.D. of Surviving the VA. We're on the air.
We will be with you in a moment. Please stand by. If you like this podcast, click like and share with other veterans.
Welcome, my fellow veterans. This is another episode of Veterans News and Special Reports. Today we're going to be talking about the first time the government has recognized post-traumatic delayed stress, but they called it back in 1918. Wow, that's a long time ago. That's over 100 years. They've called it shell shock back then. The Veterans Administration was new and formed in 1921, but the government wanted to be a superpower and get their ticket punched for world power. So they had to get into World War I to help France and England to defeat Germany in World War I. Things really got mucky there for a while. They used chlorine gas, they used anthrax, they used the dreaded flu vaccine on the American troops and other things. Now, when they also dropped 500-pound bombs, you'll see what happened. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you understand where we're going. Fighting again, and the United States needed to join in to become part of the League of Nations. World War I, the war to end all wars, started for the Americans in 1914 to 1918. 53,000 Americans died in combat instantaneously. 63,000 Americans died in hospitals in France. British doctors usually attended American troops. Troops had never seen a battle going on in Europe like this. WW1's moral fiber was something they've never been acquainted with. They hadn't heard of it. Now they're in the mix of a big battle. The first thing American soldiers saw was a field full of barbed wire and posts, huge craters with bodies decomposing of British and French soldiers. This was a new kind of war, a gut-wrenching battle war that thousands died on both sides. America filled in between the French and the British lines. WW1's Home Sweet Homes is photographed here from 1914 to 1918. One man stood watch as the other slept. Then something happened. A 500-pound shell lands. One man stood watch as others slept. The watch was over. Note the orange arrow. This man most likely has shell shock. This is something new. American troops crawled out of a hole to find his whole company that were sleeping outside, dead. A 500-pound shell lands. No time to move. This is shell shock. Instantaneously, these men are losing their home sweet home, and the men sleeping on the ground are dead. 75 men are scattered for 100 yards in every direction as the shell smoke finally dissipates, as people began to crawl out of their shelters or unbury themselves in the dirt to see what carnage has happened. These men now have shell shock. These men here are just one group of the 300,000 World War I veterans wounded in combat. The new words they learned is shell shock denied. These men came home from the war with headaches, limbs cut off, arms cut off, and the families had to take care of them for the rest of their lives. American pilots had to borrow British airplanes and various air types of tanks and other equipment to defend off the Germans. Hope you understand what these veterans were going through. The government itself was told by the British that basically to have shell shock, or the new type of U.S. we call now PTSD, nurses was cowardice after the war in veterans hospitals. This date was around 1836 to 1970 when everything changed. Let's look what this doctor's symptoms would be for different problems he saw in our veterans. Medical symptoms after combat included tendinitis, amnesia, headaches, dizziness, tremors, and a problem with loud noises. For the last 100 years, the concept of shell shock was ill-defined. Cases of shell shock could be interpreted as either physical, psychological injury, or simply a lack of moral fiber, aka cowardice. Now let's look at the true history, the way the British fixing shell shock. The British Army held 240,000 court-martials as 3,080 death sentences were handed down. Only 346 cases was sentenced carried out. The British grand total was 266 soldiers were executed for desertion, 18 for cowardice, 7 for quitting a post without authority, 5 for disobedience of a lawful command was instantaneous, and 2 for casting away their rifles or arms. This reporter has found out that all the court-martials and death sentences and even the cases that were sentenced carried out were given pardons in 2006. Talk about your backlog. Wow. In the next segment of this article that you're looking at, we're going to show you what the Americans did and how they took care of our veterans that were wounded, maimed, taken out of action by service-connected disabilities by the Department of Veterans Affairs, 1921. That was a long time and a long wait. Okay, the year was 1921. President Harding just took office and found out that the Treasury Department was swamped with the 63,000 wounded veterans of World War I trying to get disabilities. So he decided to give it to Charlie Forbes, which is of the Forbes Fortune 500 family. So here is Charlie, and he is a very interesting man. You'll see during the next part of this episode how he wound up in prison for 2 years. He was supposed to be in there for 8, but history says he was only in there for 2 years. Ford, change of history, 1923, folks. After constructing, modernizing VA hospitals, was convicted of bribery and corruption and sentenced to 2 years, they say, in prison. It was 8. He only spent 2. Not only was Charlie Forbes heir to the Fortune 500 Forbes family, but he was also the uncle of John Forbes Carey. Welcome to the Veterans Bureau of Corruption and Cover-Ups. First thing on the agenda was for Charlie to purchase a huge office building in Washington, D.C. He had it renovated for his own use, and then he started hiring employees. With millions of dollars at his disposal, Forbes hired 30,000 new workers at the Veterans Bureau, many of them who were personal friends of Forbes, and wrote their own job description and made their own rules on how they were going to do it. If a contractor had a daughter that needed a job, she would make coffee at $30,000 a year. This building had to be renovated from a hotel into a magnificent office building for the Veterans Bureau. Guess whose company got the contract to do it? Charlie's. Way to go, Charlie. Charlie would take trips by train all over the country to every state in the Union to look for properties and things to build VA hospitals in every state. Charlie took $5,000 in bribe from contractors for each new hospital they built. On these train rides, they would play poker games, and the one that lost the most to Charlie was the one that got the contract. He stole $7 million from VA hospital supplies, sold the supplies for $600,000, even as President Harding told him to stop, and Charlie stubbornly disobeyed and kept on selling the supplies to outside hospitals. Veterans Bureau corruption and cover-up. The taxpayers were stiffed for the budget of the Veterans Bureau was $1.3 billion from 1921 to 1923. Mr. Forbes built 57 hospitals across America. He would take a $5,000 bribe on a $17 million hospital build. He also denied thousands of claims, as 300,000 Americans had been wounded in World War I and continued with shell shock wounds. As Charlie Forbes left for jail, the next director found 200,000 unopened letters from veterans of WW1 in his closet. As you remember, Charlie hired 30,000 employees working at the veterans office buildings throughout the country. There was 200,000 unopened letters from veterans asking for help. What the hell were these guys doing? Okay, folks, now we get almost to the end of the series. Charlie Forbes was convicted of bribery and stealing $2 million from the Veterans Administration is what they went for. They gave him 8 years in Leavenworth, but he only spent 2. Why? Well, blackmail. He found out while he was in the Leavenworth prison that the Attorney General was selling drugs throughout the prison system of the federal government. So he got out early, and they had to send in a mafia hitman to take care of Mr. Smith that did all the documentations for the Attorney General. Okay. That's another story, but I thought you might find that interesting. Corrupted the VA system. His name was Frank T. Hines, 1923 to 1930, Director of the Veterans Bureau. From 1930 to 1945, he was the Director of the Veterans Administration. That was the new name they came up with. You guessed it, my fellow vets. The name changed to the Veterans Administration over a scandal number 2. Haynes took over as head of the Veterans Bureau after a series of scandals discredited by the agency. They considered a man of stern honesty. Wow, that's something special. What did the World War I veterans get? Another bean counter. Takes over an overpaid government system with new scandals over cheating disabled veterans out of their just benefits. Scandal number 2, the government promised these veterans a bonus check after the war. They cheated them out of that too. This system of veteran bean counters refused to answer letters to the veterans. So they came to Washington to fight for their bonus checks and their disabilities. Several people died. This is why the scandal number 2 directed the Veterans Administration to take over. Why didn't they pay the veterans what they owed them? Well, they were in a Great Depression at the time, 1928 to 1941. The America was broke. Now, but they still had the Veterans Administration workers big-time bonus checks for screwing over the veterans. VA Director Haynes was a brigade general, served as chief of embarkation services with responsibility for transporting more than 2 million soldiers to Europe to fight in the war. And he did it in 18 months and then shipped them home in 8 months. He did not fight in the war. He was in a nice office. Frank, you're still a bean counter. What was your opinion for benefits to our needy veterans? Screw 'em. The Veterans Bureau, 1921 to 1930. This system began with corruption. To a point at one time, a name change was needed. Meet 1930, the new name. the Veterans Administration. WW1 was over. Now the Veterans War had just begun against this administration. Thank you for coming to this podcast. Remember, next time you're at your local store, pick up a bottle of Henikio Heine wine to the next trip. Then lift a glass to all the veterans we lost because of the VA. The Veterans News and Special Report podcast is now shutting down and waiting for the next feature. We the people present truth, justice, and the American way. Tune in next time, folks, for the Veterans News Special Report presents the most corrupted governmental office in the United States of America. We will be talking about the Veterans Administration from 1945 to 1970 and all the corrupt things they did to hurt veterans. Okay, folks, now we get almost to the end of the series. Charlie Forbes was convicted of bribery and stealing $2 million from the Veterans Administration is what they went for. They gave him 8 years in Leavenworth, but he only spent 2. Why? Well, blackmail. He found out while he was in the Leavenworth prison that the Attorney General was selling drugs throughout the prison system of the federal government. So he got out early, and they had to send in a mafia hitman to take care of Mr. Smith that did all the documentations for the Attorney General. That's another story, but I thought you might find that interesting.